Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm Jay Daniels. In the late 50s and early 60s, the sounds of the bossa nova were starting to take shape in Brazil. It was the marriage of the samba and American jazz. The result were timeless works from composers like Antonio Carlos Jobim, Vinicius de Moraes, Luiz Bonfa, and others. The tradition of the bossa nova continues through vocalists like Daniela Soledade. Her family was instrumental in working with some of those composers we just mentioned. Recently, Daniela collaborated with guitarist Nate Najar for her debut album, A Moment of You. The two were gracious enough to join us recently from Daniela's home in Saint Petersburg, Florida. To share her musical journey with us, here's Daniela Soledade.
As a child, my father's been a musician his entire life. At 14 years old, he got emancipated so that he could work at nightclubs as a musician. So he's been doing that for his whole life. And he always had a home studio, of course. So that was my first experience, was just being at the house with him recording. He has recordings of me when I could barely talk. So it was kind of fun, and just, he was always playing around the house. So that was the very beginning. I was always singing. I was always involved in school singing things, and my dad would compose songs for the chorus teacher and things like that. So besides home things, when I was about 7 years old, he started taking me to recording studios and singing for TV shows and soap operas and all kinds of things, background vocals for artists, yes, jingles, TV commercials. So I did a lot of work actually in recording studios, and that's most of my professional work in Brazil as a kid. And then when I was 13 years old, I joined the conservatory, the Villa Lobos Conservatory, and then I studied theory and history, and flute was the instrument I picked at the time. And then about 2 years later, I realized I couldn't sing and play the flute at the same time. So I decided to play the guitar so I could sing.
Wouldn't it be funny if someone could figure out how to sing and play the flute? I would pay to see that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I started playing more guitar, but mostly just, learning songs just for fun. No classical training or anything like that, but just enough to play the songs that I liked. And because my whole family is basically artists, musicians, ballerinas, I grew up in that environment. So all of our social gatherings were everybody played an instrument, sung together. It was very nice. I really had a good time when I lived in Rio in that regard. So anyway, it's funny because I grew up in it and I never thought much of it. That was just the norm. And then much later, I started realizing, oh wow, my grandfather composed with Antonio Carlos Jobim. Like, I never thought about any of this, until later in life. And I was like, wow, this was really major. Like, everything that they did. My dad's guitar teacher was Baden Powell, which is one of the best Brazilian guitarists of all time. I was actually messaging his son the other day because on the album there's a song for Baden, right? Yes. That my dad wrote for Baden Powell. So he said, "Can you reach Philip and send him the song? I just want him to hear it because I think he would love to hear it with lyrics." So I'm kind of, my he's funny. He doesn't know how to work all of these computer things.
In Paris, right?
Yeah, Philippe is in Paris. And Marcel, which is his other son, also a really great guitarist, lives in Brazil. So anyway, as I grew up, I started hearing more stories from my dad about Vinicius de Moraes spending the night, and just what my dad as a teenager would wake up and Vinicius was like passed out on the couch. And then he would roll down to the floor, things like that. All kinds of stories. Baden Powell teaching him guitar lessons while drinking a bottle of whiskey, and the lessons would last like 4 to 5 hours. Things like that. Really, really fun stories about the time that he had, with all these musicians around his house. And so anyway, it's so funny how when we're young, we don't really understand the value, and then as we get more into it, it's like, wow, there's a poster at the apartment, my dad's apartment in Rio, that has Antonio Carlos Jobim as the music director and my grandmother as the choreographer for the play. And the play was Orfeu da Conceição, which is Black Orpheus.
Yes.
And it's because of that play that Jobim and Vinicius met to make music. And, Jobim was making music for that play, and Vinicius was the director. So it was his play. So anyway, there's so much history, so many stories. My grandfather had a nightclub also, and called Zum Zum. And in that nightclub were the very first bossa nova concerts. So it was basically where it all started. An interesting fact about bossa nova, talking about how it's nice to listen to bossa nova in this time of a crisis now. When bossa nova was happening and starting to happen in Rio, we were also going through a very crazy political time in Brazil, where the military took over, and there was a lot of chaos going on in Rio or in Brazil, and then bossa nova was like that fresh, let's talk about all the things that are beautiful, and let's not talk about politics or anything that's happening besides what's beautiful and love and nature. So it's interesting, that context of a lot of people, when we play our concerts on Fridays, are like, wow, that was really nice to just get away from everything else that's happening right now. Another fun fact about bossa nova that I like to tell at concerts is that people think, oh, bossa nova, she's, the way the women sing bossa nova is they're whispering and just being sexy. And I like to tell people, you have to remember, we lived in tiny little apartments in Rio. Yeah. And really what we were trying to do is not bother the neighbors. We had to be quiet, So that's why we sing quietly. It's just voice and guitar, very quietly. Not bothering any neighbors, and we're not trying to be sexy. We're just literally trying to be quiet. So, and that's why the style is that singing, that kind of singing.
I feel sorry for my neighbors whenever I have to do a virtual concert here at the house. 2:00 most afternoons, it's like, oh, here he goes again. We were talking about some of the origins of bossa nova, and compared to some musical genres, bossa nova only came about, say, in the late 50s. And it was a combination, I believe you were telling me, between Brazilian samba and the influence of American jazz. Is that right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So a lot of the harmonic movements, and Nate can get more into the theory of it. But it really is a combination of the rhythm of the samba with the harmony of the jazz.
Yeah, the more sophisticated harmony, more voice leading, or rather than just strictly tonic dominant sort of thing that you would get from the more traditional forms. Yeah. So with this aesthetic, this just quiet, serene, even at a samba tempo, you listen to João Gilberto, and he could be doing something that sounds relaxing as heck, but when you really listen to it, he's actually playing like a real tempo. Oh, yes. But the nature of the aesthetic of it is just very relaxed and beautiful. And
Daniela, you brought up a very interesting point, and I think this applies to just about anyone, no matter where they are in life. Your family, your father, your grandfather, they were very well connected with some of the most prolific musicians and composers of that particular era in Brazil. But as you mentioned, as a child, you don't recognize the magnitude, or you don't recognize the great importance of it. But surely having that influence in your early years must have had some sort of impact, though, on your own musical taste and your own aspirations later in life.
Absolutely. It's funny. I grew up in Rio listening to samba, MPB, bossa nova, some of the rhythms from the Northeast. So that's really what's in me. That's really my main musical nature. That's what it is. I didn't really know that was all the influence of the jazz until I moved to the United States, even though the lyrics did tell, there's a song called Influence of Jazz, or the samba died because the jazz got mixed up in it. Their music about it. I always knew that music was my passion. I always knew that's what I wanted to do. I did get distracted with some other things in my life. I got directed in a different way because of the nature of the music business. Always knowing that's what I wanted to do. So I went to school for something else, and I worked in that area, and I absolutely hated it because it's not what I wanted to do. It's so funny. A lot of people, and I don't know what's better and what's worse. I guess there's no better or worse. It's just different. But a lot of people don't know what they want to do or what their passion is, and I've always known. I knew that if I didn't follow music and if I didn't do that, I was going to regret it. And also, every time that I was doing something away from music, I was always gigging on the side because I love it, So I always picked up gigs here and there. I was playing around town, playing weddings and bars and restaurants, and I've always been involved somehow because that's what I love. It took me years to actually create the courage to say, you know what? I'm going to focus 100% on music. I'm going to stop making excuses, and I'm going to stop carrying what everyone else wants me to do, and I'm going to do what I know that is my passion. And then about the time that I actually made that decision, a month later, I met Nate.
Now, how many years was this after you moved to the States? Because you went to conservatory in Rio when you were 14, and you moved to Florida in 16, so when did you meet this character?
So basically between 16 and about a year ago, I was gigging around town solo mostly. Sometimes people hire me, I'll hire people, but then finally said, okay, that's it. This is the time. I'm gonna do music full time, no more excuses. That's all I want to do. That's what I was born to do. That's my passion. Made the decision, right? And so this is actually really interesting. I really believe that when we think things like this with this kind of passion and determination, I think there's an energy that really makes it happen, I think when we believe and we really want to do it and we start figuring out, so what's my next step? What do I have to do to make this happen? I just feel like Nate couldn't have entered my life in a better place, at a better time. So the way we met was, I figured I'm going to put a little band together, a bossa nova band together, so I can play gigs, but I want to try to get the better paid gigs. So I was going to try to play some private events and weddings and parties. And I was starting to do that before I had my last baby, and I had to stop it. But I knew exactly where I stopped, and I was just waiting for my youngest daughter to go to school so I could pick it up from there. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put a band together, and I'm going to start playing gigs. So I put my information on Google, and then I booked a wedding gig, right? So, okay, I had a wedding gig in February. I need a guitar player, and I need a drummer, right? So I contact Phil Fest. I don't know if you know Phil Fest.
I do not know Phil personally.
He's a great guitar player. He lives in Fort Lauderdale. Actually, I called Phil to ask him if he wants to play the gig. But instead of asking him over the phone, I was Googling Bossa Nova in Tampa Bay, and Bossa Nova Guitars comes up, which is a concert that Nate gives at the Palladium every year. And it just happened that it was Nate and Phil playing that concert. So Phil was coming here. He was going to be in town anyway. So I just said, hey, I see you're going to be here. Let's meet up because I want to talk to you. So we met up, and that's when I said, I got this gig. Would you like to play at the gig? And he said yes. And then when I said, let's rehearse, he was like, well, if you really want to rehearse, you should probably call my friend Nate Najar, great guitarist and lives in St. Pete. So I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. So then I send Nate a message. Hey, I'm friends with Phil. I have this gig. So we meet up at Panera to talk about this. And we start talking about everything. We realize, oh my gosh, like she's from Rio. That's what she sings, bossa nova. He's been playing, bossa nova for 20 years. So we immediately figure out like what a great match musically. You know what I mean?
I could not believe how well she knew the repertoire. Because bossa nova is not popular in Brazil. It's old-fashioned. It's old-fashioned in the way that Jimmy Van Heusen is old-fashioned here. But it was just really remarkable to me how well she knew the repertoire. Because, you as a musician, you and I both know that knowing repertoire is everything.
So we met at Panera. Then I told him about the gig. I told him, Phil is not going to come rehearse. He recommended you. And then, of course, he took the gig. Hey, you overcharged me for that gig.
I know I did.
Do you still have those sort of negotiations? It's like, now look here, this is all I'm willing to pay you now, Nate. So
I'm just kidding. No, I was going to pay Phil really well because it was driving 5 hours. Anyway, so we booked this gig for February. And then when we realized, oh, wow, we have so much in common, Nate had me sing a couple of songs at his Christmas concert. So this was November. This was end of November of 2018.
Yeah, not even 2 years ago.
That's right. It's November 2018. So then we played, then we started working together. I sang at that show with him. We played the gig in February. Then Chuck Red, of course, knowing about me through Nate, invited me to sing a Charlie Bird tribute at the Mainstay in Maryland.
It's on the Eastern Shore.
Yeah.
So then we really started working a lot together, and mostly a lot of the gigs he booked, he put me on them, and whatever I booked, I put him. He's basically my only guitar player now, and I'm so lucky. But so then that's it. And then when did you ever bring up the record? Was it February, January?
Yeah, it was
beginning of the
very
year.
Beginning of last year. I kind of said, I want to produce a record for you. I think we could do something nice with it. I spent a few years working with Stacey Kent, mostly in Europe and a little bit here. And that was a great, great experience for me. So meeting Daniela that reminded me, I could kind of do with this what I was doing with Stacey. Because I wasn't playing in Stacey's band. We were doing some things where she was doing some kind of external projects, and we'd go do some shows, and it was just me, her, and her husband, who plays tenor and flute. And so just guitar and woodwinds and voice, and sometimes she played guitar also. It was just really, really special. And I was thinking, I could do that with Daniela, and I could make a nice record, so for all intents and purposes, it was supposed to be my new band, but I'm perfectly happy just being the guitar player. And I got this carioca vocalist right out front.
And the name of the release is A Moment of You. Let's start there when we talk about this album. What inspired you to create a concept around that particular title? What's the story behind the title, A Moment of You?
So A Moment of You is part of the lyrics of Someone to Light Up My Life on the album, which is the very first song that Jobim wrote for the Black Orpheus play that I mentioned earlier. So that being the very first song that he wrote for the play, it's pretty special because my grandmother was the choreographer for the play, and that's how Jobim and Vinicius met, which is basically the start of bossa nova. And my family was involved in it. So that was the importance of that song, and that name comes from that song. Se todos fossem iguais a você is the Portuguese name. It's quite lengthy, but Someone to Light Up My Life in English. So that's how that name came up. And of course, A Moment of You could be a parallel to some of the things that were happening in my life, which is, I went to school and I got this corporate job that I didn't like. And then I had my 2 daughters and I did all these things. I opened up a business and I did all kinds of stuff. And I was like, you know what, this is the moment that I'm going to do what I love. I'm going to do something for me, and I'm going to do what I love doing. And so that also makes sense with that name.
Yes. What are ways that you found to work together toward this common goal of creating the album? It's
all Nate's ideas. Picking the repertoire was a collaboration, mostly Nate thinking of what, Nate, it's so interesting. Nate's just, He's just so talented, and he knows what he wants it to sound. He knows what he wants the music to sound. I'm a little more, oh yeah, I'm a little more, and Nate is like, no, this is, he's really he's a good director and an amazing producer. He really masterminded the entire thing. But he knew songs in English that would sound good in the bossa nova aesthetic. And then, of course, picking the bossa nova songs that are in Portuguese and English, because that album is half and half Portuguese, half English. So there are a lot of factors coming into the selection of the music, but mostly keeping the aesthetic of what bossa nova truly is about,
Yeah, so when we started playing together, one of the first things I noticed is how good time she has. And one of the most frustrating things for me in playing music with others is where we feel time. And there's certain musicians that I've played with a lot that everything lands together in such a satisfying way. And to me, that's the whole point of playing music. That feeling is the first thing that the listener gets, is how the music feels. They don't care about the notes that you're playing. They don't care if you made that run or didn't make that run. What they care about is how does it feel and how does it make them feel. And the time is such an integral component of that. Immediately, I couldn't believe how good time Daniela has. And everything lands together when we play together. She listens so well. And so when we're playing, whether it's with a full ensemble or whether it's just the two of us, we're playing and we're really listening and reacting to each other in a very, very micro level. The beat, the divisions within the beats, things harmonically and melodically, everything we just we give and take together. We kind of sway together. And we noticed that connection very early on. And so making the album and picking repertoire, it was got a big picture idea of what I kind of want it to look like. So what components do I need? Let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. We made the record in just a couple of days, but we spent a lot of time on pre-production. Daniela wasn't an artist with a career beforehand. She wasn't out doing her own thing. So instead, we used a long time of pre-production to kind of craft what the presentation is. We'd play tunes. Well, what do you think of that? Oh, I like, but what do you think of that? Okay, well, let's try this, and so forth. And we came up with something that is really so very much who she is. And that was pre-production, in terms of repertoire, we went through so much repertoire. We've got a book that thick of actual arrangements of stuff that she does. And what went on the record was to portray a particular snapshot of something. So, but we made the record in a few days. We tracked the rhythm section for 2 days, and then we spent another couple of days tightening up vocals and doing just a couple of minor overdubs. And there were 2 songs that we tracked in New York because we wanted to use Dudu de Fonseca on drums on those. So we used him and the great bass player Martin Wind, and we tracked those 2 in New York.
And the cello on Veja Bem Meu Bem.
That's right.
That song actually got picked up by Spotify for an editorial playlist, which was such a nice surprise. And because of that, we have over 80,000 streams on it on Spotify, which is really cool. But that song was really special. Nate's high school friend plays the cello on it. He's so good. And
oh yes,
he went to Columbia University and Juilliard. He is my high school friend, but he's the real thing.
He's got some talent. Yes,
he was really
yeah. And he currently lives in New York. He teaches at Vassar, I think, maybe. And I hadn't seen him in years. And I called him and said, "Hey, I got this thing. I'd love to have some cello on. Are you in town on such and such day?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I brought that track with me and had him. And he did 3 takes. I used the second take for the solo. It was fantastic.
And Nate plays every single other instrument on that song besides the cello. In that song besides the cello.
Thinking about the repertoire of the album, the songs, some of them, again, come from your own pen or, that of your father's.
Is there a particular song, and this question can be for both of you, while each of the songs are very meaningful to you, otherwise you wouldn't have included them as you did, is there a song, though, that speaks to you in such a way that it's, it stands out for you?
There's something special about the fact that there are 3 songs from my family in the album. There's something very special because there's a song that was composed by my grandfather, one by my father, and one that I composed. The one my father composed is pretty special to me, not just because it's his song, but he made the song instrumentally, and then his wife made the lyrics in Portuguese, and then I made lyrics in English for it. So it's like, our family, it's basically, I would say, the first official song that is mine and my father's together. And not only that, because he composed that song for his guitar teacher, Baden, I have caught myself sometimes when I cry of happiness, I cry of sadness, I'm a crier. Mm-hmm. So I've caught myself a few times when I'm singing the song. It's kind of emotional. Just think about the importance of somebody who taught you the instrument that basically defined the whole rest of your entire life, I mean, just think about that meaning. A guitar teacher who taught him guitar at 13 years old, and that was it. That was all he was going to do for the rest of his life. He changed his life forever, and he never looked back, So I think there's something powerful about thanking somebody. It was after his death, thanking somebody for, wow, you opened up the doors, you gave me wings, and you changed my life, and thank you, So I think I would say that song is very, very meaningful to me. And also, it's my dad playing the solo on it. So after we recorded the song, we sent it down to Rio, and my dad recorded a solo and then sent it back. So there's so much about that song that's special to me. I would say that would be one of the most loved ones by me.
When a listener, one who may have known of your work for a while, through your gigs in Florida, or possibly one who has never heard of either one of you, when they listen to the first track, and when they listen to the second and the third and so on, how do you hope this album will speak to them?
I hope it makes them feel the love that we put into making the record. I hope that it makes them happy, I hope that it makes them enjoy what is beautiful out there to be enjoyed in the world. I hope that they enjoy the fact that it's intimate and quiet and beautiful and crafted instead of something loud and in your face, I hope that they enjoy the Portuguese, even though a lot of people can't understand. I hope they can still feel the message.
I'm not a vocalist, so I have a much simpler answer than that. I just hope it speaks to them. I don't care what they get out of it. That's their business. I know what I was feeling when I put it together, especially the fact that it is not aggressive music. I just hope that somebody puts it on and gets something from it. And if they get something from it, then I've communicated. I'm good.
Final question. Why music?
Why not?
I always wondered that my entire life. But I really think we're born with something that can't be ignored. I don't know. I can only speak from my own experience, but yeah. It's not rational at all. It's something that's a voice, a feeling that's inside me. Like I said, even when I was working a corporate job, that voice would never leave me. It's just in there, and it keeps on whispering, you need to be doing music. You're not really doing what you love. You need to be playing the guitar. You need to be singing. It's like a voice that's constantly in there. So it's I would say it's divine. Mm-hmm. It's not rational at all. And I love it.
I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't feel right unless there's a guitar in my hand.
Vocalist Daniela Soledade and guitarist Nate Najar, our guest for this week's In-Studio podcast from Simply Timeless. Be sure to visit Daniela's website and join her mailing list for the latest updates. The address, Daniela Soledade, that's Daniela Soledade. The address, Daniela Soledade, that's Daniela, Daniela, Soledade, SOLEDADE.com. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels, thanking you for joining us in studio.